Welcome, everybody. I'm joined by Andy once again, and we are here to talk about the future of our hobby. Is the CCG market oversaturated? We did a video a little while ago asking the question, are we entering into a golden age? And now we're asking the question, is there too many damn games out there? And so I think that this is an important thing to think about. And we want to look at this from the perspective of players. We want to look at the perspective of collectors. And then finally, we want to head into this sort of commodification of CCGs that's happened recently. And we'll get into what we mean there. But let's start with players. Has there ever been a better time to be a player of card games right now?
Everybody who's our age, our generation is going to point with nostalgia lenses and say the 90s. The 90s were the best time. And I'm here to tell you the 90s were not the best time. The 90s card games, none of them would get printed today. Absolutely not. They would be board games or something similar within
living card games, maybe.
Living card games. I got really big into Arkham Horror LCG, which is really fantastic and a topic for another time. But that would be something that your Middle Earth CCG, Star Wars CCG, Star Trek CCG, those type of things would come out in probably that format. And a modern game is not. I would say that this might be one of the best times to be a player of card games, right? Modern CCGs, TCGs have learned from the iteration of 30 years of products, right? There's some really fantastic games out on market. Of course, you've got your big three. I don't really know anybody who's ever played Yu-Gi-Oh!
I was about to say that. But
to be honest, Pokemon. I mean, I'm sure there's some people that play it, of course, right?
Like a lot of people collect it, right?
It seems more like a collector's market, but Magic, right? There's more people playing Magic than at any point in the past, right? Despite all of the issues that Wizards of the Coast has had, it's still growing, right? Pokemon, same thing. I'm sure Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the same thing. But then you've got all these card games that are just coming off into the market or have been there for a couple of years. Flesh and Blood, Lorcana, Star Wars Unlimited, Alpha Clash, Sorcery, whether they were Kickstarter games, whether they were games that were trying to reinvigorate old IPs, Star Wars and Lorcana, or card games that were looking to take a piece of what they perceived the market was failing at, like Flesh and Blood, taking over some of professional Magic type areas of the market. And that's not, there's just a bunch of other games, One Piece, Dragon Ball Z, some game, Dragon Ball Z, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's a lot of games that are out there. And for the most part, they're, from a player's perspective, they're pretty fun games, right? Like
it's because they had the benefit of 30 years of iteration. They had to see that, hey, it turns out that players that take 26-minute turns really stalls out the flow of a game, and having setup of a game be more than 5 minutes probably isn't a good idea, and an ideal length of a game for most people is 15 to 20 minutes. Like, you have these lessons learned.
Yeah, shuffle up and start playing, or I start with this one card, or this 2 cards in play, and that's going to dictate how the whole game play is going to play. Shuffle up, draw my opening hand. We fixed mulligan rules. We fixed resources, how those get played, how that's, play, and we're right into combat and battling and interacting with my opponent 30 seconds into the game. Fantastic. And the game's going to last 15 minutes. Maybe we're playing a best of 3. Maybe it's a best of 1. I can jam 5 games in an hour, as opposed to one extraordinarily tedious Star Wars CCG game. Hell, at 1 hour, you might not have even got out of the seed phase of Star Trek CCG. So it's just kind of like, I think there's, from a player's perspective, you can easily pick up a few games, beyond just Magic, or, whatever your main game is. You can branch out and have communities and really enjoyable experiences playing games. There's just really good stuff on the market now.
Yeah, and there's also a lower learning curve, right? I mean, I picked up Star Wars Unlimited in about 10 minutes, right? Same with Lorcana. It took about 10 minutes to figure it out. And that's partially the experience of knowing how resources work and, okay, you have a power, a defense, whatever. You're trying to get to 20. But also it's because there's way less clunkiness and they feel less bureaucratic and there's less 7 years of rules and like, did you know in 2002 there was a ruling on this card that actually said this interaction goes this way? It's like, and that's partially the benefit of being fresh new games, right? But it's also things are streamlined and that's good for all players, especially new players. So let's move into the collector bucket. I think it's kind of a nightmare time to be a collector.
Absolutely agree.
Like it is such a hot mess.
Yeah. I think legacy CCGs, whether that's you want to talk about dead CCGs or just like the big three, right? We'll call those legacy. Because most things pre 2019, pre COVID, are dead, right? Except for Magic. Like I don't know anybody that still plays or gives any brain space to Force of Will. Right? Like I think, or Weiss Schwartz. Like I think that those are kind of just like, I'm sure there's people out there that are doing something with them, but for the most part, it's like there's like a demarcation line of like 2019, 2020 and forward, and then anything before that is basically just relegated to Magic, Pokemon, and Yu-Gi-Oh at this point. There's big price spikes over COVID, 2021, even into early parts of 2022. That's all cooled off and settled, especially on dead CCGs. I think on the legacy, live games, Magic, reprinting everything is really cutting its legs out. The secondary market, and you're moving into a game piece era, as Alpha Investments likes to talk about, but it's really just come down to lottery tickets in the packs. Everything is a lottery ticket, and that compresses value on non-lottery ticket cards, because I'm going to open up 80 cases of product to get 3 lottery tickets basically, and I've got mountains of essentially everything else. So it just becomes a race on eBay and TCG Player and stuff to the bottom to sell things. And it really, alt art, serialized cards, foil variants, showcases, enchanted cards, you name it, every game has it. And I don't really think it's having the intended effect of being able to differentiate yourself from your competitors. Like nobody's like, oh, I want to play Lorcana because I will get an enchanted card. You could get a showcase out of Star Wars Unlimited. It's basically the same thing, right? From like conceptually, from like a collecting standpoint, it's like a 1 in every 2 boxes or 8 boxes of cards. You get this one special foil, full art, ultra rare, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, you didn't really do anything with that. It's cool, but for the most part, putting together, it's impossible to put together sets. I'm not even going down that rabbit hole, but like you just end up with like all these kind of like gimmicks in the sets. And when it first started, I feel like was around Return to Zendikar, Kaladesh era of Magic with like, I forget what there was the inventions where you got like the special gold foil artifacts and they had the full art lands. I forget what they're actually called, but like that was when it really started. And then it's like every game's basically just adopted it.
Well, and I think that, yes, a lot of old games have had ultra rare, so this additional rarity is not a novel concept, but what is different is something like a serialized card, which is 1 of 900 and they're 1 in every 100 cases, right? And I think it's different this is a Luke Skywalker Jedi Knight. It's an ultra rare. It is twice as rare as a rare. Oh, that sucks. It's twice as rare, but like it's not 1,000
times rare,
right? And ultimately, the reason that there's been this movement is because this is what moves product. But I don't know if it actually moves product into the hands of players or just a very small number of collectors that have disposable income that then I don't even know what. Like, if you
I think it's going back to the discussion about great time for players. It is a great time for players because it makes all the cards cheap, right? Sure, maybe there's one card that's $30 now or something, right? $35 for this one card, and maybe you need 3 or 4 of them for a deck. But for the most part, most cards are like max out at like $4. Right, because of this. I think you don't really get that problem when you look at like really old games, a Luke Skywalker Jedi Knight or a Masterworks out of Lord of the Rings. You're just moving so much less volume of product in the year 2003 than you are in 2024. Like the amount of sets coming out, the amount of just sheer product hitting the market is just like worlds apart from what you had 20-25 years ago. Understandably so. I mean, the size of the market is completely grown, but that also just runs you into these like breakneck schedules of releases. It's always spoiler season. It's you're never really getting an appreciation for what you have now. It's always on to the next thing. And it's really just feels like everybody's not really trying to compete against each other, right? As far as like companies competing against each other, because every game is good. Every game basically has all the same stuff that everything else has. They're really just trying to compete for your attention rather than compete, on product, so it's like, if we don't put out a new set, they're just going to start playing Star Wars Unlimited. And, while they're focused on Star Wars Unlimited, we're not getting money from them. So it's just always trying to keep themselves top of mind and you focused on them. And I really just think that, once you start opening up, 100 or 1,000 cases to find a one of 250 serialized card, the rest of the value of the set just evaporates immediately. Or they did that, but then the company didn't print enough. You see that with, first chapter of Lorcana a year ago. You see that with what happened with Star Wars Unlimited. And then the prices of stuff just goes like crazy through the roof for sealed boxes or just product in general. Nobody can get it. And it's just the whole market from a collecting perspective, in my mind, is just a mess. And it's kind of a nightmare if you're trying to go into it with that like mentality.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I think the money it is a fundamental paradigm shift where it used to be like, why is Black Lotus expensive? It's a broken card is why it's expensive, because some doofuses still play with $30,000 decks, actually like more than that, and it's a broken card, and that's why it's good. And now it's a collector's item. It's iconic. There's all these other reasons now, but fundamentally, that's why it was expensive in 1995, right? Is because it was the best card in the set by far. And that used to be generally the most expensive rares were the best cards. There was also intersection with it. Maybe it's a card you like or it has collecting value, but it was also like, oh, of course, Darth Maul is a good card, right? And he's also very cool in foil, but the sort of cards that are good and playable are not necessarily the most valuable cards anymore. I mean, it's not 100% true, but you look at like Star Wars Unlimited, it's like the top 16 most valuable card are like the 16 showcases, right? Like, and it doesn't matter if it's a crappy leader or not. It's like, these are the most expensive cards by far are the 16 showcases due to this rarity change. It's not, the best cards. Like Vader's still expensive, but it's not, he pales in comparison to the showcases.
Sure, exactly. Your Luke Skywalker Jedi Knight, your Legolas Greenleaf, whatever you have, like, maybe there was a extra premium put on a foil version of it just because, but they were generally the best cards. They were the most playable cards. They were the things that you needed for your decks, and whether that's involved with power creep or bad design choices, in alpha for Lotus or Ancestral Recall or whatever, like short printing, with beta and alpha for Power 9 stuff. Like there's other factors that go into it, but yes, I completely agree that basically value was tied to more so to playability than it was, and the playability is what drove the demand for it, than just inserting artificially scarce cards. They're much more scarce than a regular version or a Darth Vader, or a whatever Elsa, right? Normal version, but there's still just a lot of them out there. There's a lot of product out there. So it's like, yeah, it's scarce, right? You're going to open one out of every, 8 boxes or 12 boxes or whatever. Okay. But we also printed 12 million boxes. So there's a million showcases. Okay. I got it.
Let's move on to our final topic here, which is the commodifications of CCGs.
Sure.
I think this could be a video on itself, but I think this has been a trend where this isn't just for kids, right? Like there's all these really robust secondary markets, and it's interesting that's kind of coinciding with somewhat of the death of the local game store, which used to be people's one-stop shop to getting this stuff. I mean, I live in a very large metro area, and there are 2 game stores. That's it in a city that has over 1 million people. I feel like 20 years ago, it would have been like 10, right?
Sure.
It would have been way more than one for every 500,000 people.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is online play, of course, for some of these bigger games. Some of it is just a complete shift in the way that the game's approached. I really feel like that's derived out of Magic. Specifically, up to about 10 years ago, Magic was very much, maybe 10 years ago, it had tapered off, but it was still very much in the play the game, see the world era of Magic, where it was all focused on competitive one-on-one play. So we're going to do an 8-man draft. I'm going to play just against you. Or we're going to have a standard Friday Night Magic. I'm doing a best of 3 against just you. But about 10 years ago, that all of Magic shifted into 4-person commander. So why do I need to go to a local game store for that? I'm just going to get me and 3 of my friends and sit down at my house and play Commander. I don't need a local game store for that. Whereas if it's all on one-on-one play, Tuesday night Modern, Wednesday night Legacy, Thursday night Standard, Friday night Draft, whatever, like all of that's one-on-one play. And so Magic essentially killed local game stores, in my opinion, with a complete shift over to Commander. But really what ends up also happening is, touching back to the collector side of it, but also on the kind of the player side, is like the games are really just commodities at this point. Every game is basically a really good game. Every game has its collector pieces. Every game, has, maybe a slight variation on it, differing sizes of communities and stuff. But when you go to a supermarket and you want to buy paper towels, generally you're just buying it based on price. I mean, a paper towel is a paper towel is a paper towel is a paper towel. Like, it's a commodity. And I feel like somewhat CCGs have really moved into that direction, and they try to differentiate themselves based on price points and what type of value they're adding in for an increase in price point, and that goes back to that whole discussion of serialized cards and alt arts and variant foilings and, showcases and enchanted cards and stuff. And that's really where they're taking the idea of how they're trying to differentiate their products. But you're just differentiating your product the same way that everybody else is differentiating your product, which ultimately leads you back to status quo. It's in a way it's good for players because now everything just becomes a cheap game piece versus kind of bad for collectors. But it also makes it hard on players like to branch out, right? If you want to, there's a lot of really good games out there. If you want to try to play 3 games, like,
Impossible. I just I'm in the process of liquidating Lorcana stuff because I'm just like I just don't have the brain space to have like another game. And it's like what set 4 is coming out. I can't even keep track of the stuff anymore. Stuff comes out too quickly because it is a commodity. And going back to the paper towel example, it's really more important than ever to have the brand or the IP attached to it. So do you want to play the Star Wars one? Do you want to play the Disney one? Do you want to play the Pokemon one? Do you want to play the anime-based one? Do you want to play the Yu-Gi-Oh one? Whatever. Like it is all about the IP. Or do you want to play the Magic one, which has its own lore that is, a thing.
We got it. But like, yeah, and I think that when you start looking at some of the stuff that comes off of Kickstarter, that's where you start running into like, you don't have an IP. You might have good gameplay, but I don't really see why I would pick up your game over an established IP. Like I know if I go to my local game store, which is already a big if, to play a game, I'm more likely to find somebody that's going to be also playing Star Wars or Lorcana or Pokemon or Magic. I'm less likely to find somebody playing this random fantasy generic Kickstarter game. And no offense to Sorcery or Alpha Clash, I'm sure they're fantastic games. I didn't really give them time of day. I know they get some great reviews and stuff, but like to be honest, that I don't have time for it, which also lends itself back into this greater discussion of I'm sure it's great for a player. It's probably not fantastic for a collector. And really, it's just another item on a shelf for me to look at. And so I'm just going to either go to the one that I always buy, regardless of price, because I've built brand loyalty to it, or I'm going, if I'm a new player coming in, one, is their product available, right? Like you can't buy Star Wars Unlimited at a store now. But if it is available and Star Wars Unlimited is $3.99 for a pack and Lorcana's $5.99 for a pack, I might just go with Star Wars because it's a cheaper price point, right? And right there's your commodity. So
one of the fundamental issues I think as well, and this goes back to having 30 years of experience, this isn't 1994 where the first card game, or 1993, I think technically, whatever, but we've had card games for 30 years now. And I think we've realized that there's only a certain number of ways of doing this, right? You have resources, you have guys that battle other guys to take down their life force or to get your quest points up, whatever it is, the mechanics are pretty much the same. And you have very little innovation happening because people don't want innovation, or at least companies don't think people want innovation. They kind of want reskins with a few different concepts, but fundamentally we've kind of like hit the creative peak of a lot of gaming because of this commodification, right? Because you don't actually want to be like brand new, very confusing resource mechanism, or there are no resources, right? Like a game like Android Netrunner, which was actually, I think, pretty innovative in it being completely asymmetrical. It's super cool, but it wouldn't work today. People would just be like, this is what I need to learn how to play 2 different sides. I don't really want to know how to do that. Like I'd rather just have mechanics and what I'm used to and what has been a winning formula, right?
Yeah, everything's basically just a reskin of Magic.
Yeah.
In its most reductive state, right? I pay a cost to put something into play. That something does something. With game text, it has an attack value and a defense value, whether they're 2 separate values or one and the same, right? My power's 3. When you attack, we just compare power, or you compare it to a toughness type of thing. And when it loses all its defensive capabilities, it dies. Maybe it does something, and then I gain advantage on the board to be able to attack you whether I'm doing damage or I'm gaining life or attacking a base or gaining ink or whatever it is, like I'm advancing my game state versus you. And literally like 90% of games more are basically just reskins of Magic, which, I think is one of the things that I look at to Fantasy Flight games, to some of their older designs that I really wish they would bring back in like the living card game space. I feel like living card games didn't really get the right rep that they should have. And Fantasy Flight really didn't have a plan, I feel like, on what to do when you're 2 years into release cycles and stuff goes out of print, or people have, years of product that they need to buy. They've sort of corrected for some of that now, but at the end of the day, things like the Lord of the Rings living card game, Arkham Horror, etc., are really innovative design space, which would be really nice to see. And it, coming from a CCG, TCG background, is really a breath of fresh air to play those types of games. So I think that, if we're looking at what the future of the hobby is, ultimately, I see a really great time for players. I see a hard time for collectors. I don't see that really changing anytime soon. I think as more products come into the market, for example, like hypothetically, if some type of like a Super Smash Brothers IP, like the entire Nintendo catalog, came in as like a CCG,
I already want to buy it. I already want to buy it.
Or like the I don't know, if Konami decided they wanted to do something other than Yu-Gi-Oh, right? And they bring in all of their, Metal Gear Solid and Chrono Trigger and all that stuff. Like, okay, that's cool. This is all this Konami things. Or just like movies, like where Decipher was going with Fight Club. What if you just had like, all these different like action movie heroes battle it out? And there's lots of different ways you could approach that whole IP discussion. And but if you it's not unreasonable that something like that could come onto the market. That's just another game in that commodity of games, and eventually it's just going to get to an oversaturation, and a bunch of them are going to close up shop, right? And then that's where you'll see kind of a crash. And I'm probably going to say that's going to be like 2026, 2027.
I knew I was the same. Like it, because right now, like enjoy it. Next year will be fun. 2026, I think you're going to see some of this stuff start to go away because they realize they can't. The rule is you have 3 years to beat the big three, right? And so we'll see where all these games are in 3 years. I have one kind of final question here, which is, what does all of this mean for the dead CCGs that we talk about all the time? Because what is dead may never die. But what does it mean for these markets, right? Like if you have all these players migrating from, the same decks they've been playing, like, hey, actually a new game with new mechanics, and I have to play my whatever secret base for another, like, because it is stale to play the same game over with solved metas. And so I understand why people are migrating. But what do you think it means? I mean, for me, I think this is just introducing all these games in this golden age are introducing more people to having hobbies, to doing this thing. And that is inherently good because you need to grow the pie. And along the way, you may lose some people, but I think that the power of nostalgia is going to keep a lot of people hooked. And that's the original thing that starts collecting. Like,
yeah, I have two thoughts on this. I'll keep it real brief. One, which is not my strong suit, but one is I think that most of these type of dead games, Star Wars, Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth versus System, et cetera, unless they get some complete redevelopment like the Warlord TCG just had, where it becomes a live game again. I think it's just a long, slow march of death into obscurity over the next 25 to 30 years, where the communities don't grow. They're tightly close knit between, very active people who are passionate about that game, and that group of people will continue to support that game in, whatever fashion that is, whether it's making virtual sets or it's, more collector focused like Star Trek is or whatever, right? And they'll really just have this long, slow decline, right? But my second thought is that with all these new games coming on board, right, there's got to be, anecdotally, I can even point to people who were like, hey, I got into Star Wars Unlimited and I remember playing Star Wars CCG when I was 10 in 1998. That's really cool. I want to pick that up. And so I think that what it means for the dead CCGs is that the communities do need to make sure that they are open and receptive to new people coming in. Those people are going to, one, have the same questions that have probably been answered 6,000 times. No Decipher's not getting any licenses back for anything, right? No, you can't use movie stills on Star Wars cards. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that, right? But it has to be met with like a grace and a humility that somebody decided to come find your niche thing and wants to be a part of that. And so like you have to be able to welcome them and open it and not just be annoyed that they're trying to disrupt your status quo of how you have enjoyed the game for the last 20 years, or, ask you 600 questions about things that everybody else that's come in has asked the same question and then left, right? So you have to be able to be welcome and opening to that. Otherwise, yeah, you've got the same 45 people that are really into it, and that's the end of the game when they eventually just die off.
I'll take a different stance here, which I'm going to say that the access to information is higher now than it's ever been, right? Look at this YouTube channel. There's 150 videos on Star Wars CCG. If you want to learn about Star Wars CCG, there are resources available. That the PC also has a channel. Like there is no shortage of resources, and that wasn't the case 5 years ago, right? And that wasn't the case with, a lot of games are getting card lists or virtual committees, or the work that a lot of these continuing committees have done as far as whether it's virtual sets or just even collecting resources or how to start, or emerging sites like Category 1 Games, where it's like they stock a lot of this stuff. So I hear what you're saying. I think I take a slightly more optimistic view where there's just so much easier of an entry point than there was 10 years ago of buying box of cards on eBay, which is a pretty big thing. It's a brave thing to do if you're just bored one day to buy 5,000 cards of Star Trek. And now you can, I don't know, there's lots of other people, not just on YouTube, on whatever other resources out there. We can be like, oh, I want to build this deck. I can buy these cards from websites. I can find them. There's, Facebook groups that have thousands of members that I don't think they're all active, but I just think there's more resources available. And ultimately with community, it's hard to leave a community, much like a cult, right? If it's those 45 guys, one guy might leave every 2 years, but in general, it's the close knit, element. It's like with Magic, I always felt like a number, right? I was just like, player number 4,026 at the local games, where they don't really care if I'm there or not. But if you're playing, local tournament with a dead CCG where there's like 20, or 20 is very generous, 6 of you, right? You better damn well believe that all the other 5 are going to keep people a little accountable, right? And life changes and stuff. But there is this level of almost like accountability or like a intimacy there that I think is really appealing. And that's why I like these dead games more than Magic. I've quit Magic like 4 times, right? And I'll probably be back. I'll always be back. But it didn't ever feel like I was part of anything besides a buyer.
Sure.
And that's how I feel with Star Wars Unlimited as well. I'm just like one of thousands of people playing this game and enjoying it, but I don't feel like close with anyone in it.
Yeah, I think that when you get into these little niche groups of people, they're sometimes also just stuck in their ways.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the willingness and openness to accept new people into it, and that those new people may challenge your status quo, and don't just get upset over it. And then that's just how you very much kill your game off, except for those like 40 people.
Yeah. It's hard to start anything new. That's good to keep in mind that the barrier to entry for anything is high. And as much as you can reduce that by at least being a nice person, that can go a long way.
There's a long way in life.
Absolutely. That's all the time we have for today. Andy, thank you for hanging out. People that made it 36 minutes into this video, thank you for your generous eyeballs on our 2 lovely mugs. Hope everyone enjoyed this. Please comment, like, subscribe, all that stuff. You were about to do the plug, Andy. I took it away. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was going to say, if you can find Thomas Jefferson in Matt's
you can see his eyes.
Put a comment of Thomas Jefferson, and we'll know you made it to 36 minutes.
Well, thanks for hanging out, everybody. Hopefully this was good information, and we'll catch everybody next time.
All right. Thanks. Bye.